This woman fell 33,000 feet from a plane and survived. In 1972, 22-year-old Vesna Vulovic was working as a flight attendant. But on January 26th, Vesna boarded flight 367. It was coming from Copenhagen and going to Zagreb. But the crazy thing is, Vesna wasn't even supposed to be on this flight. There was another Vesna who was scheduled to work that day, but something messed up the names and Vesna Vulovic took her place instead. And this is where it gets crazy. Suddenly, 46 minutes after takeoff, a bomb blew up and it tore the plane apart and began sucking people and everything out. At this point, the plane came crashing down and everyone on the plane died besides Vesna. Vesna was the only person not blown out of the plane because she was trapped in the plane's tail. And luckily, when the tail came crashing down, it landed on a big thick pile of snow which ultimately cushioned the fall and saved her life. She was then taken to a hospital and was in a coma for a couple of days. And that's when the doctors discovered she had broken every single bone in her body. But to everyone's surprise, she made a full recovery within 10 months.
2011, right? In Japan, there was a magnitude 9 earthquake led to a tsunami, killed like almost 20,000 people. After that, this lady, right, had like the curiosity to interview and ask taxi drivers, after the tsunami, did you experience anything weird or out of the ordinary? And they say that they pick up a ghost or a spirit. They don't even know they're dead, bro. Wait. What the fuck?
Here's another eerie piece of footage captured by a taxi dash cam in Japan. The forward-facing camera shows the cab pulling over to pick up a fare. Note that you can see a woman on the side of the road hailing the cab. The clip cuts to an inside view of the taxi. Here we see the rear passenger door open and the driver looks expectantly at it. The eerie thing is, no one gets in. Baffled, the driver gets out to see what's going on. He investigates the passenger side of the vehicle, but there's no one there.
That's fucking scary, right?
This is Grant Solomon. He died on July 20th, 2020 under mysterious circumstances. His dad, Aaron Solomon, who was also his abuser, was the only person who witnessed his death, and he claims that it was a freak accident that took his son's life. But just before he died, Grant was about to expose his father for the years of abuse against him and his little sister Gracie, who has also publicly spoken about what her father has done to her. But just before he could, he was killed while being in the presence of his father for the first time in 2 years. I previously covered Grant's story on here way more in depth, as have many other creators, so please be sure to go and watch those videos if you need more information. But the podcast Cup of Justice also just released an episode mentioning Grant's case, so I urge all of you to please go and listen to this and maybe tag the creators here in the comments to help boost this story. This is all directly supported by Grant's mom and his sister, who have been advocating for him since he's no longer here. It's really important to engage with true crime content that's supported by the families, but the other thing is that Gracie also deserves justice. She was abused by her father, Aaron Solomon, for years, and he still has not been charged for that either. He's currently just walking free. Angie and Gracie are relying on us to keep Grant's story in the public eye. If you're looking for ways that you can help, consider looking in my bio.
A man reportedly shot a naked man who was assaulting a woman. A really disturbing event took place recently in Stanton in California. On the 2nd of June 2024, a taxi man was working while he reportedly witnessed a horrific incident. He was in the process of dropping one of his customers off after giving them a lift when he stated that he saw a naked man assaulting a female victim. Now, it is believed from his eyewitness account that the alleged attacker was 20 years old and the victim was a 60-year-old woman. Now, the taxi man reportedly saw the male actually on top of the female victim, beating her. He said that he therefore shot the attacker in order to make the attack stop. He then called police to explain to them what he'd done and why. Officers spoke to the shooter on the scene and actually questioned him about what had gone on, and then later released him. The woman was treated for her injuries at the scene. The alleged attacker was obviously wounded in the shooting and was taken to a local hospital. Police state that at the moment they do consider him to be a suspect in the crime. Police are also investigating the possibility that the man who allegedly attacked the female may have been on substances at the time or suffering from mental health illness.
This man bought rope, tied a noose, drove his friend out to the woods, and encouraged her to take her own life. This man's name is Tyrell, and this story is incredibly disturbing. So the 16-year-old girl who unfortunately took her own life was Chandra Brown. Chandra was a 16-year-old girl living in Utah who her whole family called Jelly because she loved Jelly Belly jelly beans. But on May 16, 2017, a turkey hunter walking through the woods would discover Chandra's body hanging from a white rope. Next to her feet was a cell phone, a can of canned air, and a name tag for a fast food restaurant that said Jelly. Now, police obviously thought that this was somebody who took their own life, but when they looked through Chandra's cell phone, they found something disturbing. You see, there was actually a recording of the moments leading up to Chandra taking her own life. And in that recording, a male voice can be heard almost encouraging her to go through with it. It was eventually revealed that the man in that video was 18-year-old Tyrell Shibashing. Tyrell had actually purchased the rope for Chandra, he had tied the noose for her, and he had basically encouraged her to go through with it. Now at the beginning, Tyrell acted like this was a horrible tragedy and he felt bad for doing what he did. But when investigators searched through his messages, they found some disturbing stuff. So 17 days before Chandra took her own life, Tyrell texted somebody and said, "What do you do if you know that your friend is going to take their own life?" The friend he texted then replied, "Talk them out of it." Tyrell then responded, "The thing is, I want to help kill them. It'd be awesome. Seriously, I'm going to help her. It's like getting away with murder. Seriously, I'm not joking. It's going down in about a week or two." In an even more disturbing text message, Tyrell at one point texted Chandra before she took her own life and said, "Can I mutilate your body and cut your head off and dispose of it somewhere else?" After Chandra had taken her own life and Tyrell had helped her, he texted another friend and said, "Bro, it happened. I helped her do it too and I feel so guilty." But the most damning evidence was that video clip. So in that footage, which Tyrell is filming, Chandra sits with a noose around her neck standing on top of a rock in the woods. They speak to each other, and then Chandra takes that can of air duster and inhales it. Afterwards, Chandra then giggles because of the high produced by the duster can. She then loses consciousness and falls off of the rock. So Tyrell, instead of helping out someone who's trying to take their own life, then just sits there and keeps asking questions. He says to himself, that didn't work, that didn't seem to work, but he keeps asking Chandra questions, even though it's very clear that she's already dead. Eventually, he was sentenced to only 5 years in prison. Some people thought that was fair, many others claimed he should have been in prison for a much longer time. What are your thoughts on this disturbing case?
You obviously know Nightmare on Elm Street, right?
Freddy Krueger, yeah.
Wes Craven, the director, based him off a real story that he read in the LA Times. Back in the 70s, there was these articles that were made by LA Times, but it followed a boy and his family. They had moved to California. They came from relocation camps from Cambodia. The boy would constantly tell his parents that something was chasing him in his nightmares. These nightmares aren't normal, like they seem real as fuck. And his parents didn't really take it that serious. And it got so bad to the point where the boy didn't want to sleep anymore. He went days without sleeping. He would hide coffee in his closet so he could drink it at night to keep him up. And then the parents took him to the doctors. They went to go prescribe him some sleeping medicine. And again, he would pretend to take them, but he would just spit them out. And there was this one night where he was so tired that he slept on the couch while watching TV. They brought him up to his room. Everybody went to sleep. Later that night, they heard screaming in his room. They go run to his room. They see that he died in his sleep. Autopsy on the body. They can't figure out a cause of death because there's no sign of heart problems, no sign of health problems, nothing.
That's fucking creepy. I mean, we know about like sleep paralysis and shit.
Oh yeah.
And then you have different people having the same memory of the same guy.
Oh, Hatman?
No,
Or
not the
somebody else?
Hatman.
Oh,
It was
somebody else?
so somebody on social media posted, "I keep seeing this man in my dreams. If there's anybody else that knows who this guy is, tell me who he is." And then a lot of people started coming forward and saying, "Yo, I've seen him in my dreams too, bro. I thought I was the only one."
Whoa, what the fuck? No?
Yeah, this
Have
is
you seen him
sketch.
before in your dream?
A junior doctor was murdered by her husband for celebrating a year of training. It was the 14th of April 2023. Gwendolyn Amsrala was just 28 years old and living in Las Vegas. She was excited to go out with a friend on the evening in question to celebrate a milestone in her medical career. However, the next morning, operators would get a horrifying call. Gwendolyn's husband, Shiva Gummy, aged 33, had apparently been opposed to his wife going out that evening. When she returned home that night at 9 p.m, her husband wasn't there. He actually returned home at 11 p.m. It was then that Gwendolyn was brutally killed. Shiva apparently rang police at 8:15 a.m. the following morning, stating, "I want to die, but I'm not dying." He told the dispatcher he was locked in the bedroom and had stabbed himself 5 hours earlier. He then told them that his wife was lying next to him. He coldly stated, "She's dead," and then refused to answer any further questions. When police raced to the scene, they were let into the building by Shiva's mother-in-law. Police forced entry into the locked bedroom and found a horrifying scene. There was a huge bloody knife on the floor. Gwendolyn lay with open stab wounds, as did Shiva. Tragically, Gwendolyn was pronounced dead. Shiva would plead guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to a shockingly short term of between 10 and 25 years.
This disgusting pedophile was captured after using PayPal to purchase CP and CSAM. This is 24-year-old Nicholas Brenshaw from Utah. So investigators started looking into Nicholas in the year 2013. And from December of 2013 to July of 2016, authorities found that Nicholas paid over $2,700 to illegal websites to purchase CP. And while authorities were investigating Nicholas and discovering his disturbing secrets, they found that he was chatting with 19-year-old Elijah Roberts, also from Utah. So Elijah and Nicholas would use apps like Kik and Wicker, I've never heard of Wicker, to exchange CP materials. They would also chat about their deep, disturbing desires to be alone with children. These chats were allegedly extremely graphic and extremely disturbing. So when pedophile Elijah Roberts was arrested in 2016, the authorities found out that he had also allegedly assaulted a 14-year-old boy. He was also found to have been offering this young boy to other men online, meaning he wanted people to come over and assault this boy too. Thankfully though, both of these freaks were sent to prison, but sadly, Elijah was sentenced to only 60 months in prison. This is only 5 years. I think both of them deserve longer sentences, but what can I say? This is America. We prefer to punish drug users as opposed to pedophiles.
This is the last photo that 32-year-old Quaylen Campbell sent to his wife before he was found shot to death. If there's ever a story that needs to go viral, it's this one. At around 1 p.m. on June 2nd of this year, Quaylen texted his wife Talia that he was being held hostage and to call 911. He sent her this photo and his location before he stopped responding. Talia immediately called the police, but the dispatcher seemed to show no sense of urgency, so she drove herself to Quaylen's location, which was about 45 minutes away. When she arrived, the police were still not there, even though it was only a mile from the Colorado Springs Police Department. Once there, she spotted her husband Quaylen slumped over in the driver's seat of his company car, and right next to him was another deceased man with a gun in his lap. Since the police didn't respond to the call, Talia had to be the one to perform CPR on her husband, but he sadly died of a gunshot wound. The Colorado Springs Police Department eventually showed up, but only because of a second phone call from family members reporting the deaths. Authorities have confirmed that the deceased man next to Quaylen was 44-year-old David Carrolls, and the case is being investigated as a murder-suicide. Quaylen didn't know David, but it's believed that David was homeless and that Quaylen was giving him a ride. Once inside the car, David held Quaylen hostage and fatally shot him and then himself. The Colorado Springs Police Department say that they were called to the shooting that day a little after 2 p.m., but phone records show that Talia called 911 nearly an hour earlier at 1:15 p.m. According to attorneys, they are wanting to petition the CSPD to release the audio recordings of the police radio communication to see why exactly nobody responded to the first 911 call. If they had, Quaylen's life could have possibly been saved. Please keep the Campbell family in your thoughts. I've also attached a GoFundMe set up for Quaylen's wife and 2 young kids if you'd like to donate or share.
This man was in love with his daughter and killed her so nobody else could have her. The case that I'm about to explain took place in America on August 17th, 2019. And I'm going to warn you, this is absolutely messed up. Zaria Bergs was a 15-year-old girl who lived in North Carolina. Zaria's parents had her in their mid-teens around the ages 16 to 17. After Zaria was born, their relationship didn't last long. Aisha, who was Zaria's mother, got full custody due to her father Joshua having a criminal record. But Zaria would visit Joshua on the weekends. From the outside looking in, Joshua looked like a loving father. He would always post pictures of her on social media and talked about how much he loved her. Zaria was in high school and was starting her sophomore year. However, the pictures that he shared were not the reality of the situation. On August 17th, 2019, Zaria got ready to spend the weekend with her father. Joshua arrived at the home where Zaria lived and picked her up in his truck. They then went to Joshua's house and entered the home. The exact details of what happened at this point remain unclear and nobody really knows for sure. The following morning, Joshua left his home and went to the sheriff's office at 9:24 a.m. And he then went on to make a disturbing confession. He went over to one of the officers and said he would like to turn himself in for a crime he committed. The officer then asked for Joshua's name so they can put it into the system. But Joshua stopped and said his name wouldn't be in the system and that the crime he committed had just occurred. He then said that I just killed somebody. After hearing this, the officer got the attention of other officers who were at the station at the time. Joshua was then taken to a room for questioning and was booked. And this haunting mugshot was then taken of him. He then told the officers that he had just killed his own daughter. He then told them Zaria's name, age, and where they can find her in the house. Officers then went to the location Joshua described to see if he was telling the truth. They entered the home and immediately saw Zaria lying in a pool of blood. She had been bounded and left behind the front door. Zaria wasn't wearing any clothes and her throat had been slashed. And she had cuts all over her body. Joshua was immediately arrested, and he started to give details about the horrifying crime he just committed. And according to some reports, while he was explaining, he remained completely calm and showed zero emotion. An autopsy was done on Zaria's body, and it was found she suffered extreme psychological and physical torture over 22 hours. Joshua attacked her and tied her up and then forced himself upon his own daughter for nearly a whole day. During these hours, at some point, Joshua tried to suffocate and strangle Zaria to death, but these attempts didn't work as he planned. At this point, after 22 hours of horrific torture, he used a knife to cut her throat, killing her. And the autopsy said the cut was extremely deep. People who worked on this case said it was probably the most messed up case of their career. People just wanted to know why Joshua would do this to his own daughter. People then began to look for hints on why Joshua did this. Someone then noticed a disturbing post on his Facebook. He posted a photo of him showing off large knives with the caption saying, "I just really like cutting people. Oops, I meant things. I like cutting things." The knives in the post are believed to be the ones that he used to kill his own daughter. Joshua was also liking satanic posts on Facebook, which made people start thinking he was in a cult, and this murder was some sort of sacrifice. People that knew Zaria started to speak out, and according to some friends, Zaria had told them that her father had become way more agitated and angry, and she told her friends she was concerned about seeing him on the weekends. Due to Joshua's mugshot photo, people realized that he seemed to be on an illegal substance. Most people believed it was meth. For the motive behind the killing, Joshua gave many reasons, and changed his reasons multiple times. He said he killed his daughter to get back at his ex, who was Zaria's mother, and is said he wanted revenge, but for what is unclear. He then changed his motive and said he struggled with lust and control. Essentially, he lusted for his own daughter and couldn't control himself any longer. People who were at the trial said Joshua told police he was completely in love with Zaria and was jealous she was getting older and would most likely start dating. He didn't want anybody to have her, so he then killed Zaria and sexually assaulted her multiple times that night. Joshua planned the entire murder and took delight in killing her. He said it was the best 22 hours of his life, which is just sickening. Joshua was found guilty of murder and was given the death sentence, thankfully. Zaria didn't deserve this at all, and may she rest in peace. This case truly is just so messed up.
What would you do if you found out you were dating a serial killer? This case proves you really should listen to red flags. It was the 1980s in a quiet Chicago neighborhood. Sherry Hobson was dating Bruce Lindahl. Now, although she did notice some red flags and some concerning elements to his behavior, she had no idea of what he was capable of. Sherry was worried about Bruce's temper. She was aware he could fly into a rage. She also noticed that he could be really rough with her when the pair were getting intimate. She recalls frequently waking up after they'd spent the night together, feeling really groggy and disorientated. She would eventually have to come to terms with the fact that he would drug her, assault innocent victims, and kill people. Bruce had been on a hideous crime spree in the late 1970s and early 1980s. He'd actually been classed as a prime suspect in multiple murders and Rs. We know for a fact he killed at least 4 people. In 1979, he lured a 20-year-old woman, Annette Lazar, to his house under the pretense of selling her substances. He actually had a far more sinister plan. He held her at gunpoint and AR'd her. Shockingly, he was never actually charged for this crime due to Annette's substance issues. He was then free to continue attacking helpless victims. He was known to have assaulted a 30-year-old. Then in 1981, he was hacking victims' phones in order to extort money out of them. At one point, he was found in the car with an unconscious woman with a gaping wound on her head. When officers pulled him over and asked what he was doing, he said that he was just on his way to hospital. However, he was going the complete opposite direction to the hospital. The ambulance took her there and discovered that she'd actually been SA'd. Frustratingly, due to the fact that the woman had been knocked unconscious, she really couldn't provide much information as to what had happened to her, and he was set free. In 1979, 16-year-old Pamela Mora was brutally murdered. She'd been to her friend's house and then had left to go and get McDonald's. Tragically, not long later, her body was found strangled and AR'd. Now, although this murder actually went unsolved for decades, in 1993 DNA evidence proved that Bruce was her killer. Then another 16-year-old vanished. This time it was Deborah McCall. Now, police searched Bruce's apartment and tellingly found Deborah's picture. However, her body was never found and Bruce was never charged in her disappearance. On the 23rd of June 1980, Bruce snatched Deborah Colander, aged 25. She'd been in a car park in Aurora, Illinois. He AR'd her and then let her free and then was arrested. Now, he actually paid his bail and was set free while awaiting trial. Tragically, before the trial actually happened, months later, Deborah vanished. Now, obviously, she was the key witness in this case, so Bruce definitely had a motive to want her gone. 2 years later, her body was discovered, and a man contacted police to say that Bruce had actually tried to offer him money to kill Deborah. Shortly after this, on the 4th of April 1981, Bruce was visiting Naperville. He bumped into Chuck Huber Jr. and Chuck was 18 at the time. The pair ended up playing bowling together and Bruce then invited Chuck back to his house afterwards to have some drinks. When they got to the destination, Bruce stabbed Chuck 28 times. However, Chuck was not going down without a fight. He resisted and in doing so actually caused Bruce to stab himself in the thigh. This severed a main artery and caused Bruce to bleed out. Both Chuck and Bruce were found dead at the scene. Finally, Bruce's horrific crime spree was over.
Reality TV prank went completely wrong and it ended up causing a murder. There was this program called The Jenny Jones Show, and the segments will revolve around controversial things.
It was messy then.
So on this episode, it centered around 6 people who had secret admirers.
Nah, I feel like I know where this is going, bruh.
So a man named Jonathan Schmitz, he had a longtime crush, and Jonathan had hoped that it was his ex-girlfriend, but it wasn't his ex-girlfriend. It was a man named Scott Amador, and this guy and Jonathan were actually good friends.
How bad's the crush? Tell me about the first time you met him. What was your first impression?
Well, I only saw the lower half of him, so you're gonna match.
He knows you're gay, right?
Yeah.
Do you know that he is?
Anything's possible.
And keep in mind, Jonathan can't hear none of this because he's backstage. He comes out, and then they tell him his secret admirer is Scott, and they start replaying what Scott said about him.
This is definitely gonna be a hard watch.
You think Donna had the crush on you?
Did I? No, we're good friends.
Well, guess what? It's Scott that has the crush on you.
You lied to me.
He's got a cute little hard body. You know, one you just want to pick up and put in your curio cabinet.
Did you have any idea that he liked you this much?
No, I did not.
Can you tell us what your status is?
I'm definitely heterosexual.
3 days pass, and then 911 gets this call.
Okay, why did you do that?
The reason why I guess it kind of triggered them as well was because apparently Scott had been harassing him and stalking him.
You are under arrest on suspicion of rape and sexual activity with a child. The investigation concerns the vagina of a 13-year-old female, which occurred overnight on the 30th of September 2023 and the 1st of October 2020.
The pedophile in that video, along with 2 of his friends, raped a 13-year-old girl and recorded it on their phones. These are the 3 men: 24-year-old Paul Maxwell, 29-year-old Keon Bola, and 24-year-old Jeremiah Jackson. On September 30th, 2023, a 13-year-old girl in England left her home and headed to the tube station. And when she was at a tube station in Hammersmith, England, she was approached by these 3 men. They then lured the 13-year-old back to their apartment And that's when they locked the front door, trapped the young girl inside, and took turns graping her as one of them filmed it. Now, in that video footage, you can see one of the pedophiles reacting in shock, in disbelief that the police have finally caught up to him. But that video clip that they filmed for their own sick pleasure ended up being their downfall, because it clearly showed these three men carrying out one of the most heinous acts that one can possibly imagine. Sadly though, the UK justice system is a complete fucking joke, and one of the men was sentenced to 12.5 years in prison while the other two got 11 years. In England, that's the amount of prison time you get for gang graping a 13-year-old and filming it. It is an absolute joke over there. I don't even know what can be done. If you want to join me in my journey to expose pedophiles and pedophile rings, listen to my podcast, The Conspiracy Files, or you can also watch the show on YT. Or you can listen to the podcast that my wife and I co-host, Murder in America, available on all streaming platforms.
These two men were beaten and brutally burned alive, and whatever you do, don't look up the video. Ricardo Flores was a 21-year-old man from a small village in Mexico. Ricardo was a student of law, and his parents worked in the United States to help him with his funds. Because of this, Ricardo lived with his grandmother, and Ricardo's goal in life was to become a lawyer and earn enough money so his parents could return from the United States. On August 29, 2018, Ricardo's uncle Alberto asked him if he would like to come with him to a nearby village to pick up some building materials. Ricardo said yes and got into Alberto's SUV, and off they went to the village. But in a horrifying coincidence, messages have been going around on the app called WhatsApp about two men in a SUV that were out looking to kidnap children. And of course, these rumors created a lot of fear in this village, and as we know, fear can make people do the absolute worst things. Ricardo and Alberto parked not too far away from a school and drank a few beers, totally unaware of these rumors going around, and the WhatsApp message said, "Please, everyone be aware because a plague of child kidnappers have entered the country. It appears these criminals are involved in organ trafficking. In the past couple days, a number of children have disappeared. Parents, please pay attention." So, when two strangers entered the village in a SUV and parked not too far from a school, villagers had firmly believed they found who was responsible. Villagers then gathered around and approached Ricardo and Alberto in the car and accused them of being kidnappers and dragged them from their car and began to beat them. The police were alerted and arrived at the scene to see what was happening. Ricardo and Alberto were then taken to a police station 20 minutes away from the village. They were brought in for disturbing the peace due to the large crowd that had gathered around them, and they were kept there to be protected until the police knew what was going on. But the angry crowd had gathered around the police station, and in that crowd was a man named Francisco Martinez, who started a Facebook live stream on his phone. During this live stream, Francisco told his followers to come give their support and to believe him that they caught the kidnappers. Some villagers then climbed the town hall building and rang the bell to attract more villagers, to spread the news that the kidnappers were caught. It was then found out that the police were going to release Ricardo and Alberto, which only angered the crowd more. One person in the crowd then got a loudspeaker and told people to use their money to get petrol from a gas station, and to take justice into their own hands. At this time, more than 100 people were gathered right outside the police station, shouting for the men to be killed on the spot. The police then made a statement saying that the two men weren't kidnappers and that they have all been misled. But in the village, the trust with the police wasn't the best, so they obviously didn't believe them. The crowd then bursted into the police station and dragged Ricardo and Alberto out of their cells and began to beat them very badly. Ricardo's cousin Joanna was alerted of the situation and went to the scene as fast as possible. She was crying and trying her best to convince the mob that they were innocent and that this has been a huge misunderstanding, but the mob didn't believe her and they then started chanting, "Burn them." Ricardo's mother, who was in the United States, began to get flooded by messages on Facebook. These messages said that her son was arrested and suspected of being a kidnapper. She refused to believe this and clicked on one of the links she was sent. The link brought her to one of the live streams of the people in the crowd filming the beating, and all she could do was watch as she saw her son and brother-in-law being beaten by multiple people. She commented on the live stream begging the mob to leave them alone, but of course this had no effect. Alberto's wife was also sent a link, and she too had to watch her husband be brutally beaten. The mob then started to pour petrol onto the two men, and those who were in the crowd will later say that by the time the petrol was poured onto them, Ricardo had already died from the beating, although Alberto was very much alive as they set them both on fire. One person who witnessed this horrific situation said that every time the fire went out, the mob would just quickly start pouring more petrol on. Smoke from the fire could be seen from all parts of the village. The crowd cheered, believing they just saved the world from two evil people. But that's not the truth at all. The truth is Ricardo and Alberto are totally innocent, and this mob just brutally murdered two people. For 2 hours, the crowd stayed at the scene, standing around the two charred men and taking photos. Ricardo's grandmother was then called to the scene and was asked of identifying their bodies, which is just awful and horrific. Not too long after the two men died, it was confirmed they did nothing wrong. Those who were directly responsible fled the village to avoid being arrested. What is especially tragic is that Alberto had 3 daughters who are now fatherless. On August 30th, a day after the brutal murder, a funeral was held for Ricardo and Alberto, and it's believed that a number of people who were in the crowd during the murder were present at the funeral. It also turns out the message that was circulating on WhatsApp was completely fake. It was fake news and nobody checked to see if the news was real. This is just such a sad and honestly very brutal case. Mob justice cases like this are common, but this one really stands out to me. Isn't it also crazy that nobody wanted to hear and listen when they were killing criminals? But when they were the criminals, they all fled. There's many pictures and videos online showing this tragedy, but as always, I recommend to not watch them or look at them because it is truly awful. It's sad seeing 2 innocent men being killed and burned in this way, especially with the whole crowd recording and cheering, watching the entire situation with delight. May Ricardo and Alberto rest in peace.
He disappeared after his car was seen swerving across the highway. Some witnesses say that no one was driving it, but others claim to have seen someone else not matching his description jump out of the passenger seat and run into the woods. This is the mysterious disappearance of Logan Schendelman, and nothing is more bizarre to me than when someone goes missing after crashing their car. There are so many cases like this, it seriously needs to be studied. So 19-year-old Logan was last seen on May 19th, 2016. He lived with his grandma and sister in Tumwater, Washington, and that morning he told his grandma that he would likely be away for the entire weekend. Logan never knew his dad and was raised by his grandma pretty much all of his life, even though his mom lived close by in Olympia. His grandma said that on that morning, Logan seemed nervous, which wasn't like his usual self. He said that he had an epiphany about himself, and when she asked him what it was, he said that he couldn't really explain it. She said that they would talk more about this later that night, and then they both went off to work, but this would be the last time that she would ever talk to him. At around 2 p.m. a day later, multiple people started calling 911 after seeing Logan's car swerve across 3 lanes on I-5 near Tumwater and Maytown in Thurston County. People driving by said that it appeared that no one was driving the car, but eventually the car crashed into the center median, and this is where this case gets bizarre. Several people said that they saw a white man with either brown or red hair jump out of the passenger seat and then run into the woods along the interstate. When police arrived, they found Logan's car abandoned near exit 95, but no one was inside. This was about 20 miles from his home. All of his personal belongings were still inside the car, including his wallet, driver's license, and phone. They initially searched for roughly 6 hours in the surrounding woods, but nothing was found or stood out, so they had his car impounded. Meanwhile, Logan's grandma had no idea what was happening until later that night, when Logan never returned home. It wasn't totally uncommon for him to not come home for a day or two being a young kid, but by the next day she had a feeling that something was really wrong. So she ended up tracking Logan's phone to where it last pinged, which was in Olympia, and so she figured that he was just visiting his mom who lived in that area. I didn't even know that this was legal, but apparently the Thurston County Police Department was closed for the weekend, so Logan's grandma had to wait 2 days to report him missing. When she did though, the police told her everything that had happened a few days prior, how witnesses saw his car swerving across the interstate and how his car was impounded later that day after it crashed. This was complete news to her, and this is when she was given back all of his personal belongings. But with all of this information, she was able to report him missing. Logan's uncle, who was a retired Thurston County sheriff, kicked off the search for him, and it was pretty massive and intense. They searched a 2-mile radius around where his car was found, and they specifically focused on the woods alongside the interstate since that's where someone was last seen running into. Authorities brought in cadaver dogs, and they searched by land and air, but absolutely no trace of Logan was ever found. It was like he vanished into thin air. It wasn't until after his disappearance gained some traction on the news that more witnesses came forward, but what they said only adds more mystery to this case. On the morning of May 20th, a witness said that she saw Logan with 2 white men standing at the back of his car. It was parked on the right shoulder of the interstate near where it would eventually be found. She said that as she was coming home that night, she saw his car in the exact same location, only this time the hood was up and no one was there. At this point in time, it didn't look like the car had crashed yet, which is bizarre because others reported that earlier that day is when it did in fact crash. She described one of the men with Logan that day as around 6 feet tall, had blonde hair and a bowl cut, and was wearing a tank top with jean shorts that were too small for him. The other guy she described as having shoulder-length blonde hair and was wearing a flannel with jeans. Authorities later released a sketch of what one of the men may have looked like, but as of today, their identity remains a mystery. Adding to the creepiness of this case is the fact that later that night, the same night that Logan's car was found, there were sightings of a naked teenager in the area. But again, nobody knows who this was, and it was never really investigated. So police started combing through Logan's phone records, which showed him traveling on I-5 heading south that morning. But then for reasons unknown, he turns around and heads back for a little bit before turning back around, eventually stopping where his car was found. Nobody knows if Logan was even in the car that day with his phone, or if it was stolen. And it's just odd that someone who very obviously does not match his description was seen in the passenger seat. Who was that, and what was he doing? It doesn't make sense to me that multiple different people said that it appeared that no one was driving the car. That is so bizarre to me. Police also discovered that just days before he disappeared, Logan texted a woman that he met on a dating app saying, quote, "I hope I survive this week." End quote. Why he said that, no one knows. As of today, Logan remains missing, but there are a few theories as to what could have happened to him. One theory is that he suffered some sort of mental breakdown after smoking. According to his grandma, she knew that at this time Logan had been smoking, and it wasn't anything crazy, but she did worry about him doing this because it seemed to make him a little paranoid at night. He was also going through some personal things, like not really knowing what to do with his life. Logan was a really popular kid who attended Tumwater High School. He was a model student and a star athlete on the football team that everyone loved, but at the end of his senior year, Logan was at a party where a girl made racist remarks to him, and none of his friends stuck up for him, which really hurt him. It affected him so much that he completely cut off his entire friend group, and he made a last-minute decision to enroll at WSU in Pullman, which is over 300 miles away. He went there for a year before deciding to move back in with his grandma and sister in Tumwater. He worked a couple of jobs and stayed relatively busy. Some believe that with all of these sudden changes in his life, mixed with him smoking, that he had some sort of mental break, which caused him to tell his grandma that he had an epiphany that morning. And while this might make sense, it still doesn't explain where he is, or why so many different people saw someone that wasn't Logan driving his car that day. The descriptions are just so far off from what Logan looked like, and it wasn't just one person that saw this, it was multiple people, and it was in broad daylight. Another theory is that Logan's sister's boyfriend might have had something to do with his disappearance. Her boyfriend had recently moved into the home with them, and Logan and him reportedly didn't get along. Logan's other family members recall him saying that this boyfriend was a problem, but he wouldn't elaborate more, saying that it seemed like Logan was scared to talk about it. This boyfriend does have a criminal history, but after taking a polygraph and passing, police ruled him out as a suspect. Logan's family has since hired a private investigator, but no trace of Logan has ever been found. Unfortunately, the situation was not handled properly, and since his car was impounded that day, it was never processed by a crime lab, so all potential evidence was either lost or unusable. This is one of the most bizarre cases that I've ever heard of, and it is still unsolved. The fact that so many people go missing after crashing their car is so scary to me. I would do anything to find out what actually happened to them. Whatever happened to Logan that day remains a mystery 8 years later.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman, Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair, no one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
I chopped off the hands and heads of my victims with an axe. How many victims did I exactly make? I know it very well. More than 85 and less than 100. It's me, Richard Cottingham, also known as the Butcher of Times Square. Between 1967 and 1980, I ended the lives of 6 people with a terrifying brutality. In broad daylight, I played the role of a good husband, a father of 3 responsible children, and an IT guy considered a model employee. However, when night fell, I donned a wig, took on a fake name, and set out hunting prostitutes in the streets of New York. My penchant for psychological torture was evident. I enjoyed taking my time, playing with my victims. Each of my actions was meticulously calculated. Hotel rooms became the stage for my dark designs, where, to avoid identification, I chopped off the hands and heads of my victims with an axe. For years, I roamed the nighttime streets with impunity before finally being apprehended. The sentence was harsh: 268 years in prison for the rape and murder of only 5 women.
You heard about the man who vanished mid-flight? And of course you know that's what this week's episode is about. So in 1928, Alfred Lowenstein was on a small plane heading from London to Brussels. When about halfway through the flight, he gets up out of one of these seats and heads towards the back to the bathroom. Eventually, he's back there for so long that someone gets up to go check on him. Except when he gets back there, Alfred's not in the bathroom. And the only sign he had even been there was his tie, which was on the floor. The man looked around and saw that Alfred was not on the plane anymore at all. To better understand what could have happened, we need to look at the layout of the plane. So this back of the plane is separated from the rest of the plane by a door that closes. And if we look at it even closer, you'll see that here on the left is the bathroom, but here on the right is the door to the outside of the plane. And when the man went to go check on Alfred, he said that this door was unlatched. There are so many theories as to what happened to Alfred. Did he accidentally go through the wrong door? Was he pushed out of the plane? He was the third richest man in the world at the time. Did he orchestrate his own disappearance? We are doing a full deep dive on this story this week on the pod, and I'm doing it with Murder with My Husband, so you don't want to miss it.
His mother posted this cryptic message on Facebook before vanishing. 25-year-old Michaela Standridge was last seen in Concrete, Washington on the 21st of April 2023. Disturbingly, she vanished after running away from the house she was staying in and calling 911. Michaela is a single mother of a 2-year-old son. She'd been staying in Skagit View Drive and at 5:04 a.m. called the police. Worryingly, she was heard on the line screaming and shouting for help, but the phone went dead. When police arrived to the location that she called from, she was nowhere to be seen. She completely vanished and has not been seen or heard from since. Investigators found her phone near the river near the house that police had arrived at. Searches were undertaken of the river and surrounding area, but no luck. Concerningly, 5 days before she vanished, she posted this cryptic message on Facebook. It read, "If I ever go missing or anything, just know I didn't leave." Michaela's case remains unsolved and she still has not been heard from, so police are urging anyone with any information to get in contact with them.
If you've ever gone into a rabbit hole about the Paris catacombs, then you need to hear about the Palermo catacombs, because I would argue that they are even more terrifying. These catacombs are from the 1500s and they have 1,200 full mummified bodies, unlike the Paris catacombs, which only has bones. One of the most famous bodies inside of these catacombs, and just a heads up, this is pretty intense, is a 2-year-old girl named Rosalia Lombardo. This is a sketch of Rosalia. She was one of the last people to be placed inside of the catacombs, and she is in near perfect condition. Rosalia died in 1920 of the Spanish flu, and her father specifically asked that she be placed inside the Palermo catacombs. And because she never really decomposed, there's photos of her from the 1980s where she looks just like a sleeping child, even though at that point she was 60 years old. In 2009, she started showing signs of discoloration, so they put her in this hermetically sealed glass case. The next slide has a photo of her just to illustrate a phenomenon that had been happening, so just a heads up. Before she had been put in the glass case, guests would actually complain about seeing her eyes open, which was shocking to them because she was in such perfect condition, but they could actually see how crystal blue her eyes were. Like, they definitely weren't hallucinating this happening. Employees explained that it was just a trick of the light. Her eyes actually hadn't fully closed, so depending on how the light was, her eyes looked more open or more closed. But some people are so afraid of seeing that happen that they refuse to visit the catacombs. Would you ever go?
Took the life of my pregnant wife and my 2 daughters to start a new life with my mistress. My name is Christopher Watts, and on August 13th, 2018, my wife's best friend went to my home and alerted the police because my wife was not responding to her calls. The police arrived promptly, and I allowed them to search my house. But of course, they found no signs of life from my wife, Shanann Watts, or my 2 children. The police, surprised by my lack of concern, I simply told them I didn't know where she was. Very quickly, the FBI identified me as the prime suspect in this disappearance. I then pretended to make a plea for help. A few days later, I was interrogated and I was subjected to a lie detector test. But I quickly broke down after failing the polygraph, confessing everything to my father. After that, I placed my wife's body in the back seat and drove my daughters to an oil site. I first smothered Bella with a pillow and then my second daughter, Celeste. I then buried the bodies in 2 oil tanks. I pleaded guilty in November, and on November 19th, 2018, I was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole.
This woman was burned alive in a car this year and her murder is still unsolved. Mercedes Vega was just 22 when she was last seen on the 16th of April this year. Security cameras actually captured her walking into her apartment's parking garage just after 9 p.m. She had planned to go out and meet with friends but never actually made it to her car. The following day at around 1 a.m, officers responded to a call about a car on fire. Tragically, when they arrived at the scene, they found Mercedes' burned body. She was found in the back seat of the vehicle, and interestingly, it wasn't actually her vehicle that she was in. The vehicle was found at the side of Interstate 10 in Tonopah. Interestingly, her car was actually found abandoned near Mill Avenue in Tempe. The owner of the car that she was found in has still not yet been determined. According to the medical examiner, she had been tortured, shot in the arm, and had blunt force trauma to her head. She was also found to have traces of bleach in her mouth, and horrifically, it was determined that this happened while she was alive. She was found to have passed away from being burned alive due to smoke inhalation. Items were recovered from the car that she was in, including lighter fluid and gloves. Disturbingly, her case is still unsolved and her killer or killers are still walking free.
Killed, raped, and ate a student, and was never convicted of it. My name is Issei Sagawa, and I'm known for committing acts of unspeakable morbidity in 1981. The son of a wealthy Japanese industrialist, I was sent by my father to France to study literature at a prestigious university in the capital. On June 11th, 1981, I lured into my apartment a Dutch student from my university, René Hartevelt, then aged 24. To do so, I pretended to need help recording a poem in German, a language René mastered. As she recited the poem, I pulled out a gun and shot her in the back of the head. The whole scene was recorded on a dictaphone. I then raped her and extracted 7 kilograms of her flesh to eat. I took her nose, lips, tongue, arms, thighs, genitals, and anus, which I consumed cooked or raw over the next 3 days. During this time, I took a multitude of photographs that today bear witness to my actions. I then separated the rest of her body into 2 suitcases, which I intended to dispose of in the woods. But a couple noticed my strange behavior and alerted the police. I was arrested 3 days later and claimed the act was artistic. I also told the police that if I'd had a freezer, they wouldn't have found me. My case caused quite a stir at the time, all the more so as the abolition of the death penalty was voted through a few months later in France. As I was then considered to be suffering from psychiatric disorders, and therefore not criminally responsible under French law, I was never convicted and was interned in a hospital before being transferred to Japan. As the case was dismissed in France, I was never convicted in Japan, where I became known for my actions. I died last November at the age of 73.
That TikToker named Rory Teasley was murdered the day he posted that chilling final video. So, a little bit of a backstory. Rory was known on TikTok as Too Pump for TV. Before his tragic and unfortunate murder, Rory had amassed over 265,000 followers here on TikTok. As you can see, his videos got a lot of views. He was just posting this wholesome, positive content that he wanted to brighten people's days. So, Rory lived in Pontiac, Michigan, which is nearby Detroit. But unfortunately, on January 6, 2022, Rory's life would be ended abruptly. On that day, Rory was playing the game Overwatch with his boyfriend, DeQuinn Watkins. Now, at some point during the gameplay that evening, DeQuinn and Rory got into some sort of an argument. And DeQuinn just took this a step far and began to strangle Rory. Eventually, this ended with Rory being strangled to death on the couch in his home. And later that evening, DeQuinn called 911 and reported that his boyfriend was sleeping on the couch and wouldn't wake up. When authorities arrived at the home, they found Rory lying unconscious on the couch. When he was taken to the hospital, yes, he was pronounced dead. So this trial happened pretty quickly, and just this year, DeQuinn pled no contest to second-degree murder charges, and he was quickly sentenced to 15 to 99 years in prison. It's unclear what caused this argument over a video game to escalate into a murder, but sadly Rory died that day, and people online are still trying to preserve his memory by reposting his TikToks and sharing his story. And yeah, this is just another tragic TikTok story that obviously did not need to happen and should never happen.
When 10-year-old Katie Coleman was murdered, she got revenge from beyond the grave. Katie walked out of her home in Indiana on January 25, 2005. Her mum had asked her to go to the dollar store to pick up some toilet roll. She'd walked this route thousands of times before. Sadly, this would be the very last time. It wasn't unusual for Katie to stop by a friend's house on her way home, but when she hadn't returned home by 7:30, her mum Angie became concerned, and after walking the neighbourhood and finding no sign of her daughter, she called the police and reported her missing. Over 100 people joined the search for Katie, and a witness came forward to say that they'd seen Katie the day after she disappeared in a white Ford pickup truck with a man. A composite sketch of the driver was released to the public, and he was described as a white, thin male, about 5'8", and between 18 and 21 years old. On January 30th, 2005, 5 days after Katie went missing, her body was found in a pond near Cypress Lake. Her hands were tied behind her back. She'd been raped and then discarded like rubbish. A witness later led police to a man called Anthony Stockelman, saying that it was his truck that Katie had been seen in. Police questioned him, and after doing a polygraph test, he passed it and they had to let him go. Just a couple of months later, police managed to trace DNA from a cigarette butt found near Katie's body back to Anthony, and he was arrested and charged with Katie's murder and rape. Anthony received a life sentence for murder plus 30 years for rape after accepting a plea deal to take the death penalty off the table. The twist in this story that nobody saw coming was that Anthony was on the same wing with Katie's cousin. Jared Harris learned that his cousin's killer was on the same wing and repeatedly threatened his life, and on September 22, 2006, he slipped into Anthony's cell brandishing a tattoo gun. He held him down by the throat and tattooed the words "Katie's Revenge" across his forehead, a permanent reminder of what he did to an innocent little girl.
This is the disturbing UK case of the child who killed a child. In July 2018, 8-year-old Alicia McPhail was abducted from her bed. She had been staying with her parents on the Isle of Bute. She'd gone to sleep watching Peppa Pig, and no one had any idea of the horrors that would unfold. Meanwhile, 16-year-old Aaron Campbell was drinking with friends at his house. It's reported that Aaron became upset in the night due to arguing with his mum. He'd had a challenging upbringing involving alleged physical and emotional abuse. Aaron decided he would get some substances from a couple he knew. The couple in question were Alicia's dad Robert and his girlfriend. They were actually known to sell substances around the area, but Aaron couldn't get hold of them. Intending to steal the substances, he armed himself with a kitchen knife and headed to their house. This was Robert's house, where he lived with his parents and girlfriend. When Aaron arrived, he noticed the little girl sleeping and took the opportunity to do the unthinkable. He snatched little Alicia from her bed and carried her to a secluded location. He essayed her and killed her. He then threw some of his clothes into the sea. At 6 a.m. the next day, the grandparents of Alicia noticed the little girl was missing. They rang police and alerted the locals. Family actually texted Aaron and asked him to keep a lookout for the little girl, and he responded by texting, "Oh damn, I'm sure she's not went too far." A local man soon discovered the lifeless body of the little girl around a 15-minute walk away from the house. It was Aaron's mum who actually checked the CCTV footage from her house and noticed her son leaving their home and returning that night. She handed the footage over to the police. Aaron was arrested, and it was found that his DNA matched the clothes recovered from the beach. The kitchen knife was also recovered, and Aaron's mum confirmed it was from her kitchen. Aaron's Google history showed that he had searched "How do police find DNA?" and also visited a website about collecting DNA evidence. He was given a life sentence of 27 years, which was reduced to 24 on appeal.
This TikToker named Bethany Martin was arrested after stealing jewelry off a corpse. I am not kidding, this story actually happened in Texas in 2021, so let's look into it. So that video that I showed you was a real video that 17-year-old Bethany Martin made and posted on TikTok. So obviously this would be a concerning video to see just from the beginning, but when you learn the details of what happened when they found said body, you're going to be disturbed. So on July 26, 2021, Bethany Martin, who was 17 at the time, and a 16-year-old friend of hers went out for a walk. While they were on this walk through a recently developed neighborhood, they saw something strange in a drainage ditch and went to go check it out. And what they found was the body of 25-year-old Marcus Adams, pictured here. He had recently passed away after taking his own life in the area, and his corpse was just down there in the drainage ditch. No one had found him yet. So a normal person would call the police, right? But no, not Bethany and her friend. So what they ended up doing was stealing jewelry from the dead man's body. So the girls actually reached down and unhooked a medallion and a gold necklace from Marcus's neck. And while they were doing all of this, they filmed it and posted it on their Snapchat story. This was a public video that anybody that was friends with them could watch. And there is footage of this out there. It's extremely disturbing, so obviously I'm not going to put any of it in here. But yeah, and when you watch the video, you can tell that they're not treating this seriously. They're laughing, they're making jokes, saying, "Oh, I can't believe we're doing this, ha ha ha," laughing. I'm like, they're robbing a dead body. And then they post these TikToks. So after that video from Snapchat began circulating, it eventually worked its way into the hands of the police, and Bethany and her friend were taken into custody. From the outside looking in, Bethany seemed like a totally normal girl. And like I said before, she was a TikToker. She had 50,000 followers. But now she's been charged with robbing a corpse or grave. I couldn't find anything online about whatever actually came out of this, but if anybody knows the resolution or the end to the story, please let me know.
What? Nothing there, mate. Nothing there. What? There's nothing there.
This 20-year-old murdered his family a day before this photo was taken. Alan Ruby, a freshman at the University of Oklahoma in 2014, murdered his entire family, and the next day he drove down to Dallas for the OU Texas football game where he stayed in a hotel with his friends and posted this photo on his Instagram in what I assume would be an attempt to build an alibi. It didn't work, and he quickly confessed and received multiple life sentences. Shortly after the arrest, Alan confessed to the triple murder. He said he stole his father's gun and approached his mother in the kitchen, and when his mother Catherine turned to him, he shot her in the head. After she fell to the floor, she still showed signs of life, so Alan advised that he fired a second shot into her. Catherine Jr., his sister, was washing her car outside when she came into the kitchen. Alan then shot her once. He informed investigators that he believed she had died instantly. Alan then waited for his father to come home from work around an hour later. And as soon as his father John entered the home, Alan shot him in the head. He said that his father said ouch as he fell to the ground. He noticed there were still signs of life, so he shot his father once again. Alan said that after the murders, he took the surveillance footage from the home recording system and fled to the University of Oklahoma in the Jeep that his father bought him as a gift. He then went to a party at the Ritz-Carlton. According to Alan, he had been motivated to commit the murders because he had been cut off financially by his family, and was also being investigated for having stolen and forged $17.5 thousand worth of checks. Alan stated that he believed if he killed his family, he would inherit their estate. Alan Ruby would eventually plead guilty to 3 counts of murder and was sentenced to serve 3 consecutive life sentences without parole and no contact with his family or with the media. His family had requested the life sentences, and according to District Attorney Jason Hicks, if they had not done so, he most likely would have been sentenced to death. If you're wondering, the purpose of Alan not having contact with his family or the media was to avoid the possibility of a book or movie deals where Alan would profit. This woman created some of the worst videos on the internet. This is Ashley Richards from Houston, Texas. In 2015, she pleaded guilty to 4 counts of producing and 1 count of distributing these disturbing videos I'm about to explain to you. This all started in 2012 when the group PETA, or the group known as the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, contacted the Houston police about a video they had found online. This film was titled Ebony Kill Cat, and it depicted extremely sadistic and cruel acts being forced upon a kitten. So the police got in contact with the people from PETA, and they then sent them an additional 20 videos. These videos depicted the sadistic torture of various animals, including kittens, a fish, pigeons, crayfish, mice, and a rabbit, all being tortured with different things like high heels, knives, screwdrivers, and also pliers. In the videos, the woman that appeared in them was wearing a Mardi Gras style mask, and she would talk suggestively to the people watching this torture, meaning that there were people actually out there paying to watch this sadistic stuff happening, and also paying the woman to produce these horrific videos. And the worst part about these videos is that she would urinate and slowly torture and chop up live dogs, cats, rabbits, and mice. Absolutely inhumane stuff. Eventually, the police would track Ashley's IP address, which led them to her suburban home in Houston. This then led them to Brent Justice, who were the 2 people producing these horrible videos and selling them on a website online. And Congress had recently passed a bill making this specific type of video material, otherwise known as Crush P, illegal, so thankfully these 2 were arrested. But Brent Justice, after the trial, was actually sentenced to 50 years in prison. However, Ashley, the woman who actually carried out these acts on camera, was only sentenced to 10 years in prison, which is just insane. This case is absolutely sickening, and both of these people definitely deserve life sentences. I'm usually good with true crime cases and disturbing stuff, but when it comes to animal cruelty, it just hits different and more shocking, honestly. This is just crazy, and I can't believe people actually do this.
What kind of mother drives their 6-year-old child to the highest bridge they can find and then throws them off the edge? This kind. This is Gillian McCabe, and this is the murder of London McCabe. London was born in 2008 in Oregon to parents Gillian and Matt. In 2011, he was diagnosed with severe autism. He was described by his teacher as an animated, expressive little boy who was full of love. He loved to sing and make people laugh. London was the centre of his parents' world, but when Matt was diagnosed with MS, it all became a bit too much for Gillian, and in 2014, she began researching ways to kill her son. Prosecutors would later use her search history in her trial. On November 3, 2014, Gillian put London in the car, drove to Yaquina Bay Bridge in Newport, walked him to the edge, lifted him up, and threw him over the side. She then calmly walked back to the car, and as she heard her son's body hit the water, she dialed 911 and told them what she'd just done. Police had to then ring London's dad Matt and ask him to corroborate the story and make sure London wasn't with him. They then had to tell him that his son was missing, presumed dead, after being thrown off the edge of a bridge. Boats and divers were dispatched, and just a few hours later, London's lifeless body was pulled from the water. The most horrific thing is that the fall didn't kill London. It broke his bones, but what ultimately killed him was drowning. Gillian was arrested and charged with murder. Her internet history showed that she'd searched things like temporary insanity, insanity defence, and different ways to kill a child, such as stabbing or dropping from a 133-foot bridge, the exact height of the bridge that she dropped London from. Medical records show that she'd admitted herself into hospital a couple of times, claiming that she was suffering from mental illness, but that she was given a clean bill of health both times and discharged. Prosecutors in Gillian's trial said that London's murder was carried out with much calculation and that she'd faked mental illness in the hopes of getting off with a lighter sentence. Gillian was found guilty and was sentenced to life with a minimum of 25 years. In a statement from London's dad Matt, he said, "I can't say enough about this boy. He was my pride and joy. He was the centre of my world, and his loss leaves a hole in the centre of my universe. If you know an autistic individual, they need love too, probably more than you and I."
This is 3 Guys, 1 Hammer, one of the most sickening videos on the internet explained. Before I begin, I just want to say never go searching for this video. 3 Guys, 1 Hammer was leaked to a United States shock site in 2008. On your screen right now are the killers. The video begins with a man riding a bike down a street when the killers kick his wheels and strike him with a hammer off the bike. The poor victim was just going for a normal bike ride, but it ended up turning into one of the most brutal murders ever. They then take the victim into the woods where the victim is lying on the ground, and it's very clear the victim has already taken a lot of damage. He is semi-conscious and clearly has been struck in the head and face with a hammer. The video then continues to the 2 boys taking turns smashing the victim's face in with a hammer. And the victim's face is just progressively getting worse and worse. It's as if you got a pack of strawberries and just stomped on it. That's what the victim's face looked like. It was completely caved in and red and was 100% unrecognizable. There was blood bubbles as he tried to breathe, his face was just completely mangled and smashed. And if I'm not mistaken, they also put a cardboard box over his head. And the worst part is, the victim was in and out of consciousness throughout the entire video. Also, the sound of him trying to breathe with all the blood and his disfigured face is absolutely horrible. The killers continue hitting the victim in the face with the hammer. They then take out a screwdriver and begin stabbing the victim in the stomach countless times, and then the one killer takes the screwdriver and begins stabbing the victim's eyes out, all while he's still alive. The victim then tries to cover his eyes, which shows that he's still conscious, which is just so unsettling to watch. The killers put this guy through pure hell. I could only imagine the fear, loneliness, and pain the victim had to be experiencing. Eventually, the killers got bored and just wanted to finish the job, so they hit the victim in the head with the hammer a couple more times, extremely hard, which ends up killing the victim. Another disturbing part that stands out to me in this video is that at one point you can hear a car passing by, which turned the killers completely quiet until it passed. And once it did, they just continued brutally murdering the victim. The victim's name was Sergei Yatsenko, and he was just a normal guy going through his normal day when these demons just decided to do this to him. It's just pure murder with no motive at all. Never go searching for this video, please. Everyone who watched it never watched it again and urges everyone not to look it up. It's not the gore that makes it one of the worst, it's the pure evil these kids possessed. Because why in the world would you do this for fun? Rest in peace to Sergei, and I can't believe sickening stuff like this happens.
This woman screamed, "I don't want to die," as she was dragged to her death in a horrifying theme park incident. Kelty Byrne was a Canadian student animal trainer and competitive swimmer. She was working at Sealand of the Pacific to earn extra money, and this involved being trained to work with orcas, otherwise known as killer whales. In controversial theme parks such as Sealand of the Pacific and SeaWorld, huge animals are either bred in captivity or traumatically captured and ripped apart from their families and natural habitats for humans' entertainment. On February the 20th, 1991, Kelty was working a shift and 3 whales were in one of the pools, including the infamous Tilikum. In a horrific turn of events, Kelty accidentally slipped and fell into the whale pool and attempted to grab onto the edge and save herself. However, before she could do so, she was grabbed by one of the whales that dragged her into the pool. The 3 whales then began throwing Kelty around, with many speculating that they may have simply thought this was a game. Others theorised that the whales were so traumatised and angered by their lives in tiny little pools that they took it out on Kelty. She was dragged under the water and then back up, screaming, "I don't want to die." After this horrific ordeal, she eventually drowned. It's reported that she was absolutely covered in bruises, was completely battered, and also covered in teeth marks. If I didn't know this was a true crime case, I would think it was a disturbing horror film. On the morning of the 7th of October 2022, a barefoot woman was running around Excelsior Springs, Missouri, bashing on people's doors. Witnesses describe her looking like she came straight from a horror film and she was calling for help. She'd been beaten, held captive, and SA'd for weeks. The woman was a shocking sight. She was covered in injuries and was wearing a bin bag. Disturbingly, she was gasping for breath as she had a very tight metal collar locked round her neck. It was a nurse who opened the door to her and let her come in. The nurse started to call police, and at this point the woman panicked. She warned her that the captor would kill her and claimed that he had killed her 2 friends. When police got there, the woman explained that a man called Timothy had captured her the month prior. He'd been holding her hostage this whole time. She said he'd been keeping her locked in the basement and had been SAing her. Disturbingly, she told police that he actually had a young son who lived at the house with him. When Timothy had taken his young son to school the one day, she used it as her opportunity to escape. Police made their way to the home of 39-year-old Timothy Haslett Jr. and found the property did in fact have a basement like the woman described. Timothy was arrested and is facing 9 charges, including first-degree kidnapping. He's being held on a $3 million bond and faces 5 life sentences. Before his arrest, police were actually called to his address 3 times. Twice they were asked to do welfare checks, and this was from an employer and also family members. Police have searched his home with cadaver dogs and they haven't yet released what they know.